Regional leaders gather in Buenos Aires, Argentina for a high-stakes summit. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. The Argentinian President Alberto Fernandez welcomed heads of state on Tuesday to the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States Summit, also known as CELAC. Much anticipation for this year's gathering centered around Brazil's return with its new President Lula da Silva. The country left the regional bloc in 2020 under the administration of former President Jair Bolsonaro. The alliance consists of 33 nations with a goal to rebuild and promote regional integration. CGTN's Joel Richards has our report.
The CELAC summit held in Buenos Aires on Tuesday was viewed as an opportunity to unite this region, according to the host president, Argentina's Alberto Fernandez. This was an opportunity for Latin America and the Caribbean to find consensus on a series of issues ranging from trade to integration to international relations, but also pressing political situations in the region. Now, the CELAC was handed a major boost by the return to this organization of Brazil, the region's largest economy, which under right-wing President Jair Bolsonaro, Brazil had withdrawn from this organization. Under Lula, in the past 3 weeks, it returns to the CELAC, and of course with it the weight and the importance that Brazil brings to this organization. Now, in terms of discussions over integration and trade, there have been proposals for a shared currency between Argentina and Brazil, the two largest economies in South America. Uruguay's President Luis Lacalle Pou suggested a possible free trade zone running all the way through the region from Mexico down to South America. But there are differences that remain over the pressing political situation in current protests in Peru or the ongoing situation in Nicaragua and Venezuela. And those have shown that this remains on this level, a political level, a divided region. It is a region that's also looking to bounce back from the economic hits from the pandemic and the war in Ukraine. And so it has been an opportunity for the region to speak as one to international trade partners. There have been discussions with officials from the European Union, from the United States, and there's also communication with China. President Xi Jinping sent a recorded message, and that was viewed with great importance by leaders here in South America and across Latin America, where China has an increasingly important role for these countries. Argentina joined Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative last year. Uruguay is moving forward with free trade talks, but this is an opportunity. The China CELAC Forum is an opportunity for the region to talk to an ever increasingly important trade partner for Latin America and the Caribbean. Joel Richards for CGTN in Buenos Aires.
To discuss this and more, let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Mexico, Laura Carlsen is the director of the Americas program based in Mexico City. From Shanghai, Jiang Shixue is a professor and director of the Center for Latin American Studies at Shanghai University. Out of San Francisco, Gloria Riva is the coordinator of the Cuba-Venezuela Solidarity Committee in the United States. And from London, we're joined by Bruno Binetti. He is a non-resident research fellow at the Inter-American Dialogue think tank. Welcome to all of you to the show. Bruno Binetti, let me start with you. It's been a long time since CELAC has held a meeting. In fact, in between 2017 and 2021, there were no meetings. And since that time, we have seen a lot of changes, political changes in Latin America. A number of left-leaning leaders have come to power in many countries. So it's also a time when there's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot of tensions in the world right now, and it's a time of change. So given all of that, how significant is this summit?
I think you made a great point. The origins of CELAC are in the early 2000s, when most of Latin America was governed by center-left or left-wing administrations. Then there was a wave of, let's say, more centrist or right-wing governments, and CELAC pretty much fell apart. And now there's a new attempt to revive it. I think it's significant because these countries want to talk, because these countries are committed to trying to revive the organization. However, there are major challenges, and so far it's not clear that CELAC will evolve, let's say, from what it is now, which is a forum, a discussion forum, with no real institutions, with no real no concrete agenda. There's a long list of issues, but there's also little consensus, and it's not clear that countries have the political will to actually negotiate concrete agreements. As long as this doesn't happen, even Brazil, returning now to CELAC under Lula da Silva, is likely to prioritize its bilateral relations with the region and also a recreation, if you will, of UNASUR, which was a Southern American institution Brazil also created in the early 2000s. So I think it's still early to tell if CELAC, if this is the rebirth of a new CELAC. We'll have to wait and see.
Bruno, as you say, there are major challenges. It is a discussion forum. Nothing is binding, really. But what do you see as the biggest challenges facing CELAC?
I think the most basic challenge has to do with the political situation in many countries. As it was highlighted in the report, we have the situation in Venezuela, for instance, where even within left-wing governments, the administration of Gabriel Boric in Chile, for instance, has been very clear in its condemnation of what's going on in Nicaragua and Venezuela. You have a situation in Peru that is extremely tense and violent after the ousting of President Castillo there. It's not clear, for instance, how the region will position itself amid greater tensions between Washington and Beijing. So the list is long, I think, and if the countries were able to find at least some level of agreement on any of these issues, I think the existence of CELAC will be worthy.
Laura Carlsen, what do you see as the priorities for CELAC, and what do you make of the fact that Brazil is now back in the group? That's after the former president, Jair Bolsonaro, withdrew from CELAC in 2020. I mean, how important is the Brazilian return under the new leader? Laura, can you hear me? No, I don't think. Laura, can you hear me? No, Laura's not with us. Let's move to Shanghai, to Jiang Shixue. Jiang Shixue, China's President Xi Jinping, as we heard from our reporter, he sent a video recording to this conference, which took place in Buenos Aires. Now, this is a time when there have been growing ties between China and Latin America through its Belt and Road Initiative and through the China CELAC forum as well. I mean, how important is the relationship with CELAC for China?
Well, CELAC, is the only organization in the continent that includes all the 33 countries, as you mentioned just now. And also, it is also important that this is an organization that excludes the US and Canada. So in the past, 20 or 30 years, China has been paying a great attention to this organization. As you mentioned just now that in 2014, China and the CELAC set up a kind of a special mechanism of cooperation. It's called the China CELAC Ministerial Forum. And it's composed of 8 sub-forums. These areas of cooperation covers 8 areas. I can say something like agriculture, scientific innovation, business, think tanks, young people, infrastructure, people-to-people exchanges, and finally, political parties. So you can see that this kind of special mechanism of cooperation between China and CELAC covers everything at all. And I believe that this mechanism has been playing a very, very important role for the promotion of China-Latin American relationship in political, economic, as well as cultural exchanges. And finally, let me point out that this kind of a forum is good for both China and Latin America. And it can save lots of the so-called diplomatic resources. Well, so for the Chinese leaders You don't have to go to all the countries over there. We can have dialogue within one conference room. So this is good. And the next summit, as far as I know, the fourth summit will take place this year or next year. Until now, there have been three this kind of forums which have taken place over the past 8 years.
Laura, I believe you are back with us.
Yes.
Great to have you with us. We're talking about the CELAC conference, which opened in Buenos Aires in Argentina. And I mean, what's your view on the significance of this conference, and especially on the return of Brazil to CELAC? You know, as we reported earlier on, Brazil withdrew under President Jair Bolsonaro in 2020, but President Lula is back now.
This is probably the most important aspect of the CELAC conference that's taking place this week, because Brazil is an economic powerhouse and a political powerhouse in the region. In fact, CELAC really went into kind of a moribund state with the exit of Brazil and in the last few years. And now we have, again, a situation in which there are a number of center-left governments in some of the major countries in the region. So there's a lot more energy to go into this concept of South-South integration that omits the presence, the dominating presence of the United States and Canada, in order to find some formulas that are more propitious for their own development. After, of course, decades of imperialism and U.S. intervention in the region, to be able to create this space where they can, in a time of crisis after the pandemic, with the multiple crises, as they mention in the Buenos Aires Declaration, that are going on in the world and particularly in the region, to be able to create this space and try to figure out how the countries themselves can help each other in this particular moment of time.
And Laura, the Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador is not at the summit. Any particular reason for his absence?
He has said frequently that he doesn't like to travel, and that he has sent the foreign minister, Marcelo Ebrard, and anything beyond that is really speculation. I think many people were very disappointed because López Obrador has been a major promoter of the South-South integration, particularly in CELAC. You know, the last meeting was held in Mexico, and they have there was also a lot of expectation in terms of the meeting between Lula and López Obrador. There's some question also about the concepts of integration, and that there may be some differences of opinion or political strategies at this point in terms of what kind of integration we're looking at. At CELAC, it was pretty clear that they were talking about, in fact, at one point mentioned integration from Mexico to the tip of South America. This would be the scheme that CELAC has traditionally worked with, and one of the reasons that the United States and Canada are omitted. But we have to remember that López Obrador just got out of a meeting with Joe Biden and Justin Trudeau in the United States and Mexico, obviously, in which he reaffirmed the integration, the North American integration, in very traditional terms. And so there may also be a little friction there.
Gloria, President Biden was invited to this summit in Buenos Aires, but he declined the invitation. In fact, no American president has been to any CELAC summits at all. How would you characterize the relationship between the United States and CELAC, which is sometimes seen as a counter to the other big organization, which is based here in Washington, the Organization of American States?
Yes, well, there is a great reason why the U.S. would not want to recognize or acknowledge the legitimacy of CELAC, because, first of all, it was designed to exclude the U.S. and Canada for very obvious reasons, as the other speakers have mentioned, especially with Laura's view on the development that is necessary independently of the United States. But still, he's sending a representative. I think it's interesting that President Fernandez invited the U.S. and China, of course, but it's the first time that has happened. And he wants the U.S. to be part of it. I don't think that's the idea of many of the other leaders. I think what the speakers have talked about on the challenges, the divisions, the difficulties, still I think that there are certain countries that have greater weight in CELAC. That's Cuba, Venezuela, and certainly Brazil with its re-entry. So the overriding issue is, I think, having to work together through what they have just passed, the world has passed with the pandemic. And the other big development is the election of Colombia's president, which is a real change to finally bring peace between Venezuela and Colombia.
All right, Bruno Benetti, regional integration, that's the focus of this summit. In fact, there was a report in the Buenos Aires Times in which the newspaper quoted Ignacio Battesagui, who's an expert in international relations at the Catholic University of Uruguay, and this is what they quoted him as saying, and I'm quoting here: Latin America is bankrupt from an institutional point of view. It has not succeeded in integrating collectively into the world. Battesagui also said there is not even a basic consensus in Latin America on the difference between a democracy and a dictatorship. There are presidents who do not even recognize each other. What do you make of that? Do you agree with that?
I think it's a bit harsh, but it reflects some of the divisions among countries we have been discussing, right? We have to remember that Latin America is a very diverse region. We have countries with very different histories, with very different economies, very different orientations in their foreign trade. So putting together, even though we share things like, sure, common history and to a certain extent the languages with Spanish and Portuguese, the differences are enormous. So putting together, not to mention when you include the Caribbean, which with very, very different history and identity, I think sometimes the problem with institutions like CELAC is that we set our expectations too high. I think if countries are able to keep meeting from time to time, discussing some of these pressing issues, and perhaps quietly find some level of understanding, then we would make progress. I think the idea of a free trade area between all of these countries is unrealistic. I think the idea of greater political coordination is also unrealistic. Countries are going to look for their own interests. So I think we need to take it step by step. If this continues, if the institution survives this time and continues building on this, I think it will be worth it.
Gloria, what do you make of Ignacio Battasagui's comments? I mean, essentially what he's saying here is that Latin America has failed and is failing to make its collective voice heard in the world.
Well, I certainly don't agree with that. I'm sorry, I have construction sound outside my window. I didn't expect that. But Uruguay is very unhappy about the CELAC summit taking place today for different reasons. There has been conflict with their other governments, but I think it doesn't really carry much weight. The goal of institutionalization of CELAC is a major goal in this meeting. It may not be fully accomplished, but the idea of having one united voice in the context of world developments and negotiations with other countries, with the relations that are already developing and deepening with China, with Russia, with Iran, something that, of course, is a rejection of the idea of the Monroe Doctrine on the 200th anniversary this year.
Yeah. Laura, there are 15 priorities on the summit's agenda, the three key ones being regional health cooperation, food security, and the integration of Latin American and Caribbean infrastructure. These could hardly be called political goals, but how do you see these priorities being tackled and, if possible, being met?
Well, in the Declaration of Buenos Aires, they've already come out with, some very specific infrastructure projects that they want to promote. that have to do with there's already electrical interconnection between the major countries. They want to increase the gas line interconnection between the countries. It's worthwhile noting that this is nothing new, that this has been a plan that's been around for a long time, and that there's been some criticism of some aspects of it in environmental terms that will probably come up in the future as well. In terms of the health cooperation, they already have a good, strong background with the CEPA, the Economic Commission's report on health self-sufficiency for the region that really lays out a number of measures that can be taken in order to create a better situation with which to, in a unified manner, confront pandemics and other major health threats to the region. I think, there's a number of other points in the declaration. There's the gender gap. There's climate change, which is a major issue, especially for Colombian President Gustavo Petro. They're talking about promoting clean energy. They're talking about, as a bloc, pressuring developed countries to pay up on the 100 billion, it would be in English, that they're supposed to dedicate to climate change by the year 2025. So there's some kind of specific things involved here as well. There's the formation of working groups. But the question for CELAC has always been, how do you really make this operative?
Yeah.
Do have a difference of opinion among countries, and you do have some things in common. So it's an initiative, and it's not entirely fated, like the quote that you read earlier stated, because there are actually some instances of success both in CELAC and in UNASUR, when they have been able to get together and they've been able to break diplomatic stalemates, including potentially conflict-ridden situations through dialogue. There's a strong commitment to dialogue and to keeping Latin America a peace zone. So I wouldn't be nearly as pessimistic as the quote, but it's a difficult task.
Jiang Shixue, in 2021, China adopted the China-CELAC Joint Action Plan for Cooperation in Key Areas. What's that about?
Well, this kind of a cooperation program covers everything, political, economic, and as well as people-to-people exchanges. But the focus is on trade and investment. And China wants that the so-called Belt Road Initiative can play a very important role in pushing forward the bilateral relationship between the two sides. Now, there's one big issue we need to discuss. That's the so-called U.S. fact. I have to say that the U.S. fact is there. Well, I've been hearing from two different arguments about the role of Latin America for the China-U.S. confrontation. Well, the first argument says that the more severe confrontation between U.S. and China, the better for Latin America. Well, the second argument says that, it's not a wise idea to take sides between the U.S.-China cooperation. So we are going to see how Latin America will do in the near future. Until now, I believe that this kind of U.S. factor really affects the China-Latin America relationship.
Right.
There are 4 countries in Latin America which have not signed the document of cooperation for the BRI, Belt Road Initiative. They are Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, and the Bahamas. And for some countries, particularly for the big countries like Brazil, Huawei's 5G is not accepted. So I hope that these countries will not take sides in front of the U.S.-China confrontation.
Right. Bruno, I want to talk about one other development which has the potential to be pretty significant, and that is the proposal announced by Brazil and Argentina to come up with a common currency that will work alongside their own national currencies. This will be known as the SUR, or the SALT. They have invited other Latin American countries to join this monetary union, but will this get any traction? What do you make of it?
I think it's too early to say. I think the political announcement came first, but we've gotten really few technical details about how this measure will be implemented. What we know so far is that rather than a common currency, the idea is to encourage the use of local currencies in bilateral trade and phase out, let's say, the use of the dollar. This would be especially important for Argentina because the country is going through a significant currency crisis. U.S. dollars are scarce in Argentina. Argentina doesn't get enough dollars to eat. As far as I said, this is very premature. There was an attempt in the past to do this. It was optional for companies. It didn't really work. I think it's natural, especially in a volatile environment like Argentina.
Right.
Companies prefer to be paid in dollars, right? So I think this will take time. And that we'll see whether the technical details start appearing. So far, we haven't gotten those.
All right. Laura, I just have about a minute left. I want to get your view on this common currency. When it comes to fruition, it will be the second largest multinational currency bloc, that is, after the euro. But not everybody is on the same page. I mean, you did mention the reservations that Mexico has had on other issues. Well, Mexico also has a reservation on the introduction of this common currency as well. But do you see it happening?
Well, yeah, the president of Mexico came straight out and said, I'm not for that. We're all in with the dollar, basically. Yeah. And so I think this is an aspirational goal. They've announced it. It's a very difficult thing to actually achieve. They're trying to say this is where we want to go. And it's taking place within a world where there are a number of initiatives to try to break away from the control of the dollar for a number of different geopolitical and economic reasons. So I think it's something that they'll build on, but I also would not expect to see that happen anytime soon. I think they're just saying we want to be a bloc that is on the global economy together.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thank you to all of you for being with us. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thank you for watching.